All right, you guys, this is week 5 of the nervous system reset. Can't believe we're almost done. We are going to be talking about hormones this week. Now, I know sometimes when we hear hormones, we automatically think, things like estrogen and testosterone, but the reality is our body has tons of hormones that are doing all kinds of different functions throughout our body on a daily basis. So, we're going to be talking about how strength training and nutrition and nervous system regulation can positively affect these hormones, right? So a lot of salesy things out there about hormones are going to try to sell you supplements, detoxes, quick fixes, right? But hormones are the ways, your body's way of communicating. So they are constantly responding to things like stress, sleep, nutrition, the type of movement your body's doing, how good you're recovering, things like inflammation, blood sugar, right? Your lifestyle in general. So, this week isn't about trying to hack those hormones, right? But how do we support the systems that will regulate those hormones naturally, right? So we know that our hormones affect our energy and our mood, right? We also know that they are linked to our metabolism, sleep, cravings, our menstrual cycles, muscle growth, how much fat we're storing, all these things. And so what we need to understand is that they're rarely working alone. Like, yeah, sure, maybe you're high in one particular hormone, but if one thing's out of balance, it kind of leads to a domino effect. So, um, when you talk about medications and supplementing and hormone replacement, um, things like that. Nothing ever replaces the basics. And even any doctor will tell you this, right? Like, if you're able to have strength training as a part of your life, quality nutrition, if you're moving your body and you're sleeping and have your stress under control, like your hormones are going to function better. Now, you may still need some support, but the support isn't going to be as effective without doing all of these lifestyle things. Now, you probably already know that as your sleep goes down, or your quality of sleep and your quantity of sleep, your cortisol goes up, which is your stress hormone, and that also bumps your hunger hormones up. So, this can make it really difficult to lose weight if you're just constantly feeling really hungry, or if the reverse happens to where you never feel hungry, right? So, chronic dieting can actually impact your reproductive hormones and thyroid as well. So, we want to stay away from extreme diets, but we do want to do the things that are going to support us having a healthy body composition. Now, as we get to be more sedentary and move less as a society, right, we've noticed that insulin sensitivity becomes an issue, chronic stress because we can be working at all times of day or night, right? These affect the hormone systems in the body. Now, you might have heard about GLPs as well. These are a big deal in the health and fitness industries right now. And I think that we need to talk about just making sure there's balance, right? Because hormone replacement therapy can improve your quality of life, especially if you are suffering from menopause symptoms, severe fatigue, hot flashes, bone density concerns, things like that. So, I guess my take on it now is with all the modern technology we have and great hormone replacement, we don't necessarily need to suffer unnecessarily now that we have these things available to us because there are tools that can help us. But at the same time, these things are not a replacement for having good muscle mass, for, getting as much sleep as we can for movement and stress and nervous system regulation. Same idea with GLP-1s, right? For some people, they can be life-changing and medically appropriate. Originally what they were created for is probably not what they're being used for now. It's interesting. I think a lot of it has moved towards more aesthetics versus just general health. And I've also noticed as human beings and as Americans, we tend to pendulum swing to extremes. So we have an obesity crisis in our country. So now we're seeing this huge swing to everybody's getting on GLPs and potentially getting too lean to where it's actually affecting negatively their muscle mass. So always think about long-term health, right? Not just short-term benefits, but we want to think about muscle preservation. So, has there been research to show that GLPs can negatively affect muscle mass? Yes. Has it been shown that if you keep up the right lifestyle, it won't affect it too much? Yes. So just make sure you're thinking long term about your health. We want lean muscle mass for quality of life, right? It might be fine to to look a certain way, maybe in your 30s and 40s. But as we get even past these ages, we want to have that muscle mass so we're not going into the home, right? Okay, and then our nutrition habits, those should be habits that we can sustain long term through a lifetime of being healthy. We want to have a good relationship with food. You know, GLPs could help your relationship with food, they could hurt them, but really, you want to get to the root of your relationship with food before just jumping on some hopefully magic fix supplements, right? We also want to make sure that your body's still able to get metabolic adaptation from exercise and that the things you're doing are sustainable. So, any intervention, right, potentially even exercise, is going to have benefits, potential risks, and trade-offs. So, you should always weigh those short-term results, like what am I looking to gain from this, with what's going to be good for my long-term health and what's going to be sustainable. Now, there's not probably decades of research on a lot of these hormone replacement therapies and GLPs, and now you're seeing these peptides. So you just have to weigh the risk versus reward because, I mean, it's not the same as smoking, right? But for a while, everyone was saying smoking was fine. Doctors were doing it in hospitals, and then we found out it causes lung cancer. So could there be something like that with some of these supplements? Potentially. You don't want to live your life in fear, but just be smart and think about whether the risk is worth the reward for you. Now, one thing we do know is that strength training and hormones go really well together. So, one of the biggest things about strength training is it improves your insulin sensitivity. So, when you build muscle, your body actually becomes more efficient and better at using carbs for energy instead of just storing them, which is what you want, right? You want to be able to eat carbs and not be like, oh my gosh, I went straight to my hips, right? So, when your blood sugar is more stable, this helps your energy a ton, which also helps your cravings and inflammation. So, then it makes it easier to maintain a healthy body weight. This strength training also helps with cortisol. So, although exercise is technically a stressor on your body, controlled stress, as we've talked about, makes us more resilient. So, appropriate training is going to teach your body to adapt, but we just want to make sure you're not getting too much intensity without recovery because that can backfire. But appropriate movement is going to help regulate your nervous system. It's going to make sure that um, when your cortisol gets high in life, because it will happen, that it's able to come back down to a healthy level. And that's basically what exercise is doing. So let's say 3 days a week, you're training your body that I can get my cortisol high, I can get a stress response from working out, and then it can come back down after. That's going to carry over into all 7 days of the week. No, the goal is not zero stress, right? It's becoming more adaptable to that stress. Now, specifically for women, strength training also helps support healthy estrogen metabolism because estrogen itself is not bad, right? We need it. But there's issues when that becomes heightened too much. When we're chronically inflamed, we become undermuscled, and then that really affects sleep deprivation and stress. So, if you're finding that maybe there's a bunch of excess fat stored in the trunk area, a lot of times that comes along with perimenopause and menopause, right? And then throw in some mood swings, heavy cycles, irregular cycles, right? It is hard to be a woman. But strength training is going to be your friend, and being consistent through all of those changes and fluctuations is going to be good for you. Muscle mass is protective long term, like we've talked about. It improves that metabolic health, blood sugar, bone density, aging outcomes, all the things. So you want to keep a strength training routine that's sustainable even as you're going through these hormone fluctuations. Now, as far as nutrition and hormones, your hormones don't care about a calorie number, right? They care about the inputs or what you're putting in. So when we talk about taking in protein, this helps support muscle mass, blood sugar stability, staying satisfied, which is really important because when you feel full longer, it's easier to stay on track with a healthy diet. And also, protein takes more energy to digest than, say, simple carbs and fats, which is why you want simple carbs around your workouts because they're easily digested. But why we want protein every, 4 to 5 hours to keep our blood sugar stable. And so we feel more full. And also because that's going to help our metabolism. right? Because as we're putting in that protein, our metabolism has to fire up in order to digest it, and that's good for it. Now, the healthy fats, these are super important for hormones in particular in our brain. So we want things like eggs, salmon, avocado, nuts, seeds. Healthy fats are delicious, so they're usually easy to eat. If anything, sometimes we get too much of a good thing. But chronically under eating can signal stress to the body as well, right? Just like chronically overeating can. So when we're under eating, or overeating, often we feel really fatigued, we have cravings, we're not able to recover well. That would probably be more so from undereating. But you can see disrupted cycles and just energy can be all over the place as well as these blood sugar swings. So, if you are getting constant spikes and crashes, like maybe if you're going too long without eating, this can affect those hormone levels, and then that leads to affecting your mood, which is then going to affect what food you want to choose. So, you're not crazy. There is physiological things that we're working with here when we're talking about these things. It's not just all psychological, although that's a huge component. But if you feel full, right, because you've eaten a balanced meal such as protein, it is much easier to say no to fast food. The times that I find myself wanting fast food or candy or things like that are when I am just really hungry or really stressed or a combination, right? So, that's why we want to focus on eating regular meals with enough protein and just this consistency instead of extremes. You know that, your body's a machine. Well, machines don't like extremes. They like routine, right? So the more routine you can give it, then it's going to be able to handle those random spikes when you're like, okay, I went to Disneyland and I wanted to eat the giant cookie the size of my face, right? And my blood sugar was able to come back down after because I have been training all year for this. Okay, that's kind of a fun example, but it could happen. So when we talk through hormones, again, it's not just estrogen and testosterone, right? We talk about adrenaline, cortisol. We've talked about neurotransmitters, right? Adrenaline is not bad. It's very helpful short term for things like workouts, emergencies, performance. I would say mom life, sometimes work deadlines, right? The problem is when it stays up. So then that's when we get into the hormones going all crazy because one of them's staying high. And so the others are doing all these things, right, to kind of try and even things out. But a lot of times as they're doing that, you start to feel like a crazy person, right? You might feel really anxious. You might feel exhausted, but then you can't fall asleep. That's a terrible feeling. You might have really stubborn fat loss, even when you're like, I haven't changed anything with like my workouts or my eating, but all of a sudden I've gained weight or I can't lose it. Or you're just kind of feeling like constantly on edge, even when you don't have a lot to do, you like feel like you should be doing something. So sometimes what you need is not like, oh, I need to be stricter with my nutrition and stricter with my workouts, right? I think that's where we tend to go, but you probably just need to get that system regulated, doing all the things we've been doing for the past few weeks. Get yourself into some good regulation, and then from there, let those hormones even out so you're not working against yourself. So you're going to focus on having regular meals, making sure there's enough protein, making sure you've got some sort of strength training in your week, and then of course, all the things that are good for our health, like the things that are good for our nervous system are good for our hormones. The things that are good for our hormones are good for our digestion. So really, as we get good at these habits, it's just going to affect each system in the body positively. So, walking, right? Sunlight, get outside. Sleep consistency, even if, again, your sleep is not great, but if you can get into bed at a fairly consistent time and get up at a fairly consistent time and give yourself time to rest, even if you're waking a lot, this is going to be good for you. We want to keep our stress, under control. Now, obviously, that can be from emotional things, relationship, work. So you've got to do the work in those areas, but also regulate your physical body through exercise, through good nutrition, so then your stress doesn't have to spike as high when you have to deal with a difficult relational conflict or when you're trying to parent or when you have a work deadline, right? And again, it's not about being perfect. In fact, I'd rather you be imperfect and do something that's maybe at a lower level than what you could potentially do, but you're able to do it for a longer amount of time. So sure, maybe in the past you have done these crazy workouts and done these crazy diet plans, but you weren't able to sustain that for years, right? So we're looking at things that you can just keep doing forever and be a good model to, people in your life and be showing up the way that you want to show up. And just remember, medications and therapies can totally help, but the foundations still matter. So you really should be doing those things because whether you're taking medications or hormone replacement or peptides or not, they're going to be good for your body. And if you are using supplements or interventions, they're going to be much more effective when you have this nervous system regulation, this base of good habits. So either way, that should be your first priority. And then if you need to be adding those things in, try to find somebody that's going to prescribe them to you that's also going to care about your lifestyle factors and hold you accountable. And that's also why I love what I get to do is to coach so many of you. It's so much more than just workouts and nutrition, but really it is having a healthy lifestyle. And sometimes having a coach that can take an objective look at things that tend to be really filled with emotion, like our weight, our percent body fat, our eating habits, they tend to be really personal. And a lot of times, I think especially for women, we feel a lot of guilt and shame about either the things that we're doing or not doing, about the way that our body looks, just maybe that we should be doing more for our health. All those things can be really difficult. So it can be nice to have someone in your corner that just goes, "Hey, let's look objectively at your week and what would actually be realistic." Like looking at your week, I don't think you're going to be able to hit 5 workouts. So let's program in 3 with a fourth optional day. That way we're not setting you up for failure with like, "Well, actually, let's put in 6 days." And then you're like, "I only got 2." Right. So having a more realistic, objective view of your upcoming week, and then not just for workouts, but for nutrition. Like there are weeks when I am able to cook and meal prep, and there are weeks when I'm not. And so if I were to try to have the same plan for those weeks, I'm going to not be set up for success. So it can be really helpful to have not just the plan, but then also the accountability and support to stick to it because life gets crazy. Things get hard. We get discouraged. Sometimes we go backwards in progress. And so it's really easy to quit and give up. But when we have somebody else cheering us on and that can help us kind of see through those small dips to show us that we're making long-term progress, that can be really helpful. So, anyways, I hope that this nervous system reset has been helpful, has been educational, has been motivating, has been fun. Um, I hope it didn't feel like a burden to add these things, but more just good reminders. And, the more you do this, the longer you're on your health journey, the more you'll realize it's always just coming back to the basics. It's always coming back to those fundamental things that are important, right? To eating enough good food, to strength training, to walking, to having good relationships, to getting outside, to staring at a screen less, right? These are all things we know are good for us as humans. It's how God designed our body. And so I hope that you're able to feel motivated to get back to some of these things without guilt and shame. And if you are interested in continuing with any kind of one-on-one coaching, there are so many different options. You can do nutrition on its own, you can do strength training on its own, you can combine it, and then there's different levels depending on your budget and need for accountability. So I would love to chat with you if you have any specific goals, whether it might be training for a marathon, or it might be getting back into shape after having a baby, or it might be preparing to have back surgery, or it might be, starting to get into that empty nest season of life where you want to really focus more on your health and your hormones. So, whatever that might be, that's why individual coaching is so awesome because we're all at different places, even though our same goal is to be healthier. So, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions about hormones or any of the things that we've talked about, if you need help connecting with some good doctors or people that can get you hooked up with peptides, I do have some resources for that as well. So, anyways, I hope that you have a great rest of your day wherever this takes you to next, and please keep in touch.